Time for another tour around the world of geopolitics over the last 6 months, coinciding with our June update of the Apolitical World Map. We'll start in Ukraine, where the expected Ukrainian counteroffensive is considered imminent. We covered that fully in a video just a couple of weeks ago, so check that out for the full story on the enormous battle to come. But a couple of developments have occurred since then. Most notable was the Belgorod operation. On May 22, 2023, Ukrainian-backed Russian forces in opposition to the regime in Moscow crossed the border of the Belgorod Oblast. They were able to seize a border checkpoint in several villages. The Russians, who had been building defense lines in the Belgorod area, were forced to send in reinforcements from other areas of the front. Eventually, they arrived in force and bogged down the fighting in the town of Gryvoron, prompting the rebels to withdraw back to Ukrainian territory the next day. Additionally, the day this update was released, June 1st, another incursion appears to have been launched in the Belgorod region. Reports indicated that fighting took place near the village of Shebekina, with the Freedom of Russia Legion again leading the assault. They claim to have successfully captured the border region and begun fighting for the town. However, at the time of the release of this video, their renewed ground presence on the Russian side of the border has yet to be confirmed. Although the incursion was short-lived, and although the rebels did not specifically declare an opposition regime in the areas they briefly took, the episode still laid bare to a shocking extent the vulnerabilities in Russian border defenses, with the majority of their military strength now concentrated in eastern and southern Ukraine. On that note, it remains to be seen how effective Ukraine's counterattack will be against the bulk of Russia's reinforcements. However, operations such as the Belgorod incursion, as well as recent drone attacks all over the Russian Federation, including Moscow, at least serve to distract Russia and scatter its focus in multiple different directions. In addition to keeping you up to date on these incursions and the situation in Russia, we'll be back with more videos covering the counteroffensive once it commences. One other administrative note on the map update: Russia officially folded the small remaining portion of the Mykolaiv Oblast, consisting of just the Kinburn Spit, over to the Kherson Oblast, and therefore into the Russian Federation proper. One country caught in the middle of the tensions in Europe is Serbia. The traditional Russian ally has made efforts to better integrate with the European Union over the past decade. However, this has always been made difficult by Serbia's continued interests in Kosovo, which declared independence with NATO backing in 2008, and which represents an object of historical affinity for Serbia. Not helping the situation is a sizable population of minorities on either side of the border, with tensions having ratcheted up in recent months between the Kosovar Serbs living in border areas of the north and the Kosovar Albanian-led government. This led to a boycott of mayoral elections by the Serbs, leading to ethnic Albanians winning the elections in these majority Serb areas. The government in Pristina attempted to double down, attempting to use police force to impose the authority of the new mayors. This led to clashes which were then separated by NATO troops, resulting in several injuries. NATO immediately called for both sides to back down, and despite the tensions with Serbia, American sources have been quite candid that the Pristina government needs to work something out in an attempt to restore the fragile status quo. In the Caucasus, Russia's attention focusing elsewhere continues to increase the power vacuum in the region, leading to yet more back and forth between Armenia and Azerbaijan, though thankfully contained at this time to the diplomatic arena, as the two sides continue to try to negotiate a permanent settlement over the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh. A Russian-led negotiation session devolved into an argument featuring the longtime Azeri leader Aliyev, as well as Armenia's westward-leaning elected Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, traded public barbs, with Pashinyan at one stage even interrupting Vladimir Putin so that he could add another point. On the ground, Azerbaijan set up a checkpoint along the Lachin corridor, which had been guarded by Russian peacekeepers since the end of the 2020 war, and which provides the only access to Stepanakert from Armenia proper. No blockade has been imposed, and civilians and supplies are still allowed to pass. However, the addition of Azeri troops is certainly notable. In Afghanistan, although the resistance fight continues from the Panjshir rebels and other Northern Alliance-related rebel groups affiliated with Ahmad Massoud, they now do so fully in a hit-and-run style, with the Taliban now controlling the territory in Panjshir and other areas of the northeast, but still at risk of hit-and-run attacks in what has evolved into a more typical guerrilla-style resistance. On May 27th, tensions flared in the Helmand River Valley, where a group of smugglers reportedly tried to pass from Afghanistan into Iran. The Taliban has been a longtime rival of the regime in Iran. However, since the Taliban's return to Kabul in 2021, the limited relations between the two have been mostly cordial. In this case, Iranian border guards started to fire at the smugglers encroaching on the border. Not realizing what was happening, the Taliban's own border troops began to return fire. With the situation still unclear, the Afghans attempted to capture 4 villages. However, they were repulsed by the Iranians. Although Iran does not officially recognize the Taliban regime, they do still have an embassy open in Kabul, setting up a meeting with Taliban officials to defuse the situation. The next day, both sides said the situation was back to normal and the border was reopened. On the ongoing situation in Sudan, we did a video updating you just a few weeks ago as both sides dug into their positions. The existing Sudanese regime under General Burhan and the rebellious Rapid Support Forces under General Dagalo or Hemeti. The front lines of this conflict have not changed since our last report, so check that out to see how the situation got to this point, with Hemeti in control of most of Darfur in the southwest and the Sudanese army in control of much of the rest of the country. International evacuation efforts have continued to run into difficulty due to the contested status of Khartoum, necessitating that evacuations from the city take place over land. Where this standoff goes from here is not clear, but for now the two would-be generalissimos have their heels dug in. Similarly, the standoff in Libya continues, though at this point it maintains a diplomatic nature rather than a military one. It's now been over a year since Marshal Haftar and the Eastern forces once again broke away. However, although split between opposing regimes, the country has thus far avoided slipping back into the perils of civil war. In Ethiopia, the last time we touched on the Tigray War, a peace deal had just been signed. For now, the Tigray National Regional State has reacceded into the Ethiopian Federation, with the Tigray People's Liberation Front now attempting to make the transition to a normal political party. How things develop in the north will be a key area to continue to watch. Meanwhile, there has been a general die-down in fighting between the Ethiopian government in Addis Ababa and the Oromo Liberation Army. Its own hit-and-run attacks and control over rural areas provided support for the Tigrayan attempts to capture Addis Ababa. However, with the Tigrayans having now given up the fight, the OLA has noticeably decreased its rebellious actions. Although nothing has been officially signed, it seems only a matter of time before the OLA also comes to a deal with the Ethiopian government. In Somalia, the last 6 months has seen a resurgence in al-Shabaab, mainly in the south, where it had previously been isolated to a series of inland river valleys, but now has re-established its control over several towns on the coastal road. This continues to be an ongoing threat for Mogadishu, as well as for the southern town of Kismayo, both of which have been the victims of terrorist activity, as we've previously covered. Manipur, the easternmost region of India, with its capital at Imphal, has seen an escalation of the continuing decades-long ethnic tensions, mainly between the urban and rural populations, which on both sides constitute numerous ethnic groups. Again, the current situation is merely an escalation of a decades-long running conflict in one of South Asia's more unique regions. In Myanmar, further developments in the civil war there are unclear over the past 6 months. Solid reports of territorial control have become increasingly scarce. That even as fighting in some areas has intensified, with the opposition government still having hitched its wagon to the several ethnic militias willing to work with it, and the Tatmadaw, the Burmese military, has maintained its peace deal with the Arakan Army, a major guerrilla group, while continuing to fight the more conventional forces of the Kachin and Karen breakaway states, who are of course aided by the opposition government in exile, as well as attempting to keep a lid on any further unrest in the cities, primarily Yangon or Rangoon. As we covered at the time, the communications cables from Taiwan, stretching to its outlying possessions, the Matsu Islands near the mainland coast, were severed by an unknown party. Taipei quickly placed the blame on Beijing, saying that it caught 2 merchant marine vessels leaving the area shortly after the incident. However, the boats were able to escape into PRC waters, thus no further investigation was able to be brought forth. The incident left the Matsu Islands digitally unconnected from the rest of the world for 5 days, laying bare the need to shore up the security of such cables, which are assumed by military analysts to be one of the first targets that would be hit in any modern littoral war, including a potential invasion of Taiwan. Another security concern about that possible scenario is the status of the Philippines. As we covered a few months ago, the Philippines under Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has completed its pivot back toward Washington and signed a military deal granting the Americans access to 5 additional Philippine bases, while also serving the Philippines as deterrence against further encroachments from Beijing, such as the previous seizure of the Scarborough Shoal. In El Salvador, we previously discussed the election of Nayib Bukele. The center-right populist has gained attention in recent months for his crackdowns against the gang MS-13, which has ravaged El Salvador and the other Central American countries. Although the pro-Western Bukele initially had a good relationship with the United States, things have cooled since the advent of the Biden administration, which has accused Bukele's ministers of corruption. Still, Bukele stands out in the region amidst the rest of the new pink tide, and has positioned himself as one of the few leaders open to the West in the region, pushing back against that trend. In any case, should the issue with MS-13 be successfully tamped down, it would have a positive effect on security throughout the region, including in Mexico and the United States, where many of those fleeing MS-13 seek asylum. In Mexico itself, we've made one update to the map. The Zapatista rebels in Chiapas, a self-proclaimed anarchist group that formerly fought against the Mexican government, has not engaged in much violence over the past 3 years, and it begrudgingly accepts the authority of the Mexican government, who likewise begrudgingly accepts the rebels' anarchist communes, though clashes do occasionally still occur. However, for the purposes of territorial control, it no longer makes sense to depict the Zapatistas with their own political entity, as it is no longer actively fighting against the sovereignty of the government in Mexico City. We will continue to follow these conflicts along with all the others going on in the world, each of which have been updated as well, even if we didn't mention it. So make sure you check out the full updated map at apoliticalworldmap.org. Make sure you hit subscribe and the bell button to stay tuned to the channel. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and make sure to leave a comment. It helps out the algorithm. And if you can, please sign up for our Patreon to keep the videos coming. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Alex. I am out.